I consider Lillith from Paladins a failed design. Let's look at her trailer and see what kind of vibe we're going for here. She's dark, spooky, she fades in, and she's confident, snarky, probably powerful, and a little mysterious. Also scared the community into thinking that she had a res, that was fun. Her lore blurb is very similar to other Paladins baddies. It's some person, they get hurt, then the Abyss is like, yo, do you want some cool stuff? And voila, now she's an immortal vampire. If I had a nickel for every time someone got corrupted by the Abyss, I'd have 4 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened 4 times. This character's goals are, she wants a realm blessed by the bounteous gifts once bestowed on her, ones that nobody will be allowed to deny. Whatever that is, so the lore is not helping too much. Now we also know that she's a vampire, and that she's a support, and instantly we're thinking of some sort of mechanic where you take health from enemies and give it to allies. So going into this from a purely aesthetic point of view, we've got this vampire sport who's a baddie and knows it, and she wants something. So the lore isn't great, but at least we've got some cool expectations set by her visuals and lore and other stuff outside the game. But when we look at the game, when we look at her kit, we don't really see anything line up.
Sorry, I just think I'm too stupid to understand this.
Lillith's kit is weird. Her gimmick is her blood health, which sits just outside her normal HP bar, which is tiny. And this blood health both counts as HP, as in it goes down when you take damage, and as a resource for her abilities. This is a cool idea. You are effectively trading your survivability for output, and that's just great. Like, there are so many rewarding decisions that can come from just that concept. But it falls apart when we look at the rest of her kit. First of all, she has like 5k HP, which is higher than some tanks. This is very strange. Most supports sit around 2200 HP, and it puts some weird restrictions on her. Basically, you can't have one character do everything. There needs to be some stuff they do well, and some stuff they do poorly. If they do everything well, then they're broken, and there's no reason not to pick them. If Lillith has this insane bulk, then you're not going to kill her before the DPS that the Lillith is playing with kills you, so she has to lack in other areas. And the area that she was chosen to lack in was damage. This character does very low damage, has a very low ammo count, and has a weird projectile with a weird pre-fire. Now this sucks, both for how she feels to shoot with, and for the main point that I'm getting at later. But let's talk about what this character does well. Healing. She does an absolute ton of healing. 2 of her abilities, her Mark and her Swarm, both heal, and her Mark is her way of regenerating that blood health that she uses. Swarm costs blood health to use, her Mark does not. So most of her gameplay is using Swarm, marking people, and weaving in shots when you can. She also has this little jump that moves her forward and costs blood health to use. So we have a Mark to heal and regen blood health, a Swarm to heal that costs blood health, and a little jump that also costs blood health. Now the important part of this kit is that all of her abilities can also do damage. You can put Mark on an enemy to damage them over time. Swarm damages enemies that step in it. Even your jump has this little slam that does damage. So she's beefy, and her abilities can do healing and damage. What else can she do? Well, nothing. And that's like this character's whole issue. She inherently outputs nothing. There's a lot of reasons for this. Swarm is her big, most impactful ability. The mechanic that we haven't talked about yet is how she uses it. Swarm is channeled and then deployed. The longer you charge it for, the more healing and damage it does. There's 2 practical outcomes with this. Either it's more value to spam the ability and just tap it, in which case there's not really a point to having the charge mechanic in a kit, or it's more value to channel the ability to full. Balance-wise, it is currently more value to channel the ability to full. Swarm has a 2-second cooldown and takes 1 second to charge. That means that if you want max output with this character, you are spending a whopping 66% of your game channeling an ability. And when you're channeling an ability, you're not outputting anything else. And considering this is your main form of sustain for tanks, you're going to be using Swarm off cooldown and purely for healing. But what about her other form of healing, her Mark? This ability is also kind of weird. The damage and healing that it does scales up over time, so it's actually kind of hard to tell how much you're doing without really diving into the numbers. Well, that's fine, it's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. The damage that it does is percentile based. It always deals 1.5% of the enemy's current HP every 0.325 seconds. So again, it's hard to tell how much damage you're actually doing. The biggest thing about this ability is the duration. It's got a 4-second cooldown and a 10-second duration that cannot be cancelled, but you can only have 1 mark out at a time. These timings work fine for healing. You'd maybe rather have a shorter cooldown since that tends to just feel a bit better. High APM and you get to spend more time doing other things so you don't have to remember that you need to move Mark in 4 seconds. But an unstoppable percentile damage over time effect on an enemy is not great. Hit a button, this person is taking damage for the next 10 seconds and there's nothing they can do about it. So it's nothing egregiously bad, but it's very weird. And the devs know it's weird because they put in some bonus features. It can never kill an enemy. This is presumably so that the bad feeling of getting damaged with no counterplay that is inherent to this ability doesn't turn into the worst feeling of getting killed with no counterplay. And to add counterplay, they added a unique reveal mechanic. An enemy marked by Lillith is revealed to the Lillith, and the Lillith is revealed to the marked enemy. This seems to be intended to offset the upside of free damage for 10 seconds. But it ends up just not mattering most games. You mark your own team for healing 90% of the time, especially since, surprise, there's more complexity in your kit. You get less blood health from marking enemies than from marking allies. But when the effect does happen, best case scenario it's not a downside, it's an even trade for both players and teams. The worst case, it's a buff to the Lillith, since reveals tend to be impactful for projectile characters in duels. And living as a support against DPS characters is more impactful, since DPS characters are usually on a timer when they're trying to kill you, and a support staying alive is inherently valuable. So the reveal definitely benefits the Lillith more when she's just trying to live. Even though, because of the difference in blood health regeneration, you'd rather just mark an ally anyways and live with your sustain. So the ability is complex, a little funky, but fine overall, especially in its main use case. But as one more thing, the ability's animation is extremely long and locks you out of you using your other abilities or shooting. This isn't a bad thing. Cool animations can make the player feel awesome. But for Lillith, it's on a 4-second cooldown. This ability is going to be used very often. You're not going to get the impact of exaggerating a cool animation that often. This is why you usually see these awesome animations in alts like Furia and Vora. Lilith's ult has a pretty cool animation, but it's also cancelable extremely early. It feels like the animation cancel got put on the wrong ability. And remember, Swarm is taking up 66% of your gameplay time, so adding another thing that isn't really gameplay to this character is really starting to take time away from, the gameplay. So her output is limited by her abilities design, but it's also restricted by her HP. I mentioned this earlier, but if this character is going to have 5k HP and good healing, if she has good damage as well, she might start crossing the line into broken territory. With her current design, it's just hard to justify giving her good damage, because getting walked at by something you can't outplay is one of the worst feelings in the game. Speaking of things you can't outplay, let's talk about her ult. Her ult is fine, it looks amazing, and it gives everyone on Lilith's team 35% lifesteal and heals the Lillith for 600 blood health per second. This is cool, it's a good ult. It's well designed, it's a big teamfight ult, it lets the Lilith do cool stuff. And because we have anti-heal in Paladins, it shouldn't be frustrating to play against, right? Well, for some reason, the lifesteal and self-healing from Lilith's ult is not caudable. It can't be anti-heals. I don't understand this, it just makes the ult feel awful to play against. There's nothing you can do to stop the enemy from just out-trading you. It's that feeling of getting walked at with no counterplay. It also limits the amount of power you can give Lilith ult. If you make it caudable and bump up the numbers, you can give Lilith this feeling of invincibility, of immortality. Because then, even if it's technically stronger, having it fall off late game gives the player fighting the Lilith a win condition of bringing the game late. The Lilith gets to feel immortal, the enemy gets to feel like they have counterplay. I feel weird saying this, but that's kind of why anti-heal in Paladins works. Now let's tie all this up by talking about her main gimmick again, her blood health. It kind of falls apart when you look at the numbers and compare the amount of regen that you have versus the cost of using your abilities, and realize that in most fights, when you're just playing with your team and you're not under an insane amount of pressure, you don't have to worry about managing your blood health resource. You can safely spam your abilities. There's no downside, you will regenerate enough blood health just fine, so you can pretty safely ignore the coolest idea in her kit. Now if you are under a lot of pressure, let's say you get out-poked really hard, brought down to low HP, maybe you don't want to peek again. Lilith can only regenerate her health out of combat up to around half of her total HP bar. So if you get poked out really hard, on top of channeling Swarm and watching Mark animations, you're just going to spend more time sitting back and watching while your Mark regens you to a safe amount of HP. Taking too much poke as Lilith means you go sit in the timeout corner for a bit. The other situation where supports get a little scared, besides taking too much poke, is when they get dove. Some flank comes around, some tank dashes in, whatever. Someone is committed to the fight, either the backline is dying, or they are. Now you can safely spam abilities from the backline with no issue, right? But that's when you're not under pressure. When you do get Dove, that blood health that you spent to use abilities suddenly becomes crucial to you living. Your abilities just are not strong enough to warrant the HP that they cost. When you get Dove on Lillith, your best option is to not use any abilities, because that is your best way to survive. And that sucks. I want to use my abilities, man. I want to fight stuff. I don't just want to try and make myself as strong of a punching bag as possible. And we've basically only talked about design so far, but it is worth mentioning that Lillith is currently not super strong. Her healing is the only thing that she has going for her, but she doesn't really fit in the meta and can't compete with the healing output that the top supports do right now. So she's not great. In summary, Lillith is a cool idea with a cool gimmick, but that gets ruined by her high HP stat and ability design and balance, forcing her to play slowly or not play at all. The only time this character does something unique or exciting is when she is doing something that has no counterplay. Now we could talk about solutions here, and that's normally what we do in these sorts of videos. Fury crafting and game design is my jam, I love this stuff. But I don't want to do anything to Lillith. I don't want anything to happen. I want this character to stay bad. I'd rather the other cool supports be played. I think if Lillith was strong, it'd be unfun. I think Lillith is just a failed execution of a cool idea. But there is a support character in another game that embodies the cool idea that Lillith was meant to be. Ana is a support in Overwatch with 2 abilities. The first is Anti-Nade. If it hits an ally or herself, it will heal for 100 and makes the targets receive 50% more healing for 4 seconds. If it hits an enemy, it will deal 60 damage and prevent them from receiving any healing for 4 seconds. Her other ability is Sleep Dart, which puts an enemy to sleep. If you want to talk about this in Paladin's terms, it's a 6-second stun. Her ult is Nano Boost, which bursts one ally for 250 healing, then gives them 50% damage reduction and 50% damage amp for 8 seconds. First of all, it's great that we don't have to spend 10 minutes talking about how this character works, but let's talk about how this super simple design accomplishes what Lillith cannot. Lillith's gimmick is her blood health acting as her HP and as a resource. What this means is that she has the same resources to survive with as she does to be aggressive with. The difference between Lillith and Ana is that Lillith does nothing and Ana is legitimately broken. Like, Nade and Sleep are stronger than some alts. Her damage is good too. She can 3-tap squishies. Like, just look at the damage comparison between these 2 characters. It's insane. So why isn't Ana broken? Like, she kind of is, but why doesn't she just dominate every game? Well, that's because she can't really survive without her cooldowns. Getting big value on Ana isn't just impressive because you used the abilities well, it's impressive because you gave up your survivability for aggression and got away with it. And you can miss these cooldowns too, or they can get blocked. It is such a skill-dependent character. Even her weapon shots, I talked about Lillith's weapon shots being clunky, and Ana unscoped projectile shots are clunky sometimes too, but the reward you get is great, and you have hit scan scope shots if you want to use those, but there's ups and downs to both. Even her ult, using your CDs while hitting your shots, means that you can build this thing extremely quickly. You can even use nade on your team instead of yourself or the enemy if you think that's worth it, which it very often is, and doing that helps build your ult even faster. There's so many impactful, skill-filled decisions being made, even if it's choosing to not do something, and every decision you make means you give something up. You can make a very impressive Ana montage, but a Lillith montage is just not something that could ever happen. Ana uses the same resources to survive with as she does to be aggressive with, and she does both extremely well. Lillith also uses the same resources to survive with as she does to be aggressive with, but her design prevents her from being aggressive, so all she's left with is surviving. It's just this very slow, high downtime, very passive heal bot playstyle, and that's not going to change unless her design changes. So yeah, it's maybe not the most obvious comparison, especially visually, but I think it's a good look at the design intent that lies just below the ability descriptions. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.